everybody, Kush Philosopher here, coming to you from Ann Arbor here on the 12th of October. I'm going to review or just comment on this book, Science of Marijuana, by Leslie Iverson, put out by Oxford University Press a couple years ago. This book seems to be a very good analysis of marijuana. And why do I review this book? Well, because there's so many opinions everywhere about marijuana these days. It's really hard to figure out what's going on. You know, you've got stoners will tell you one thing, and then the scientists will tell you 5 different things, and politicians, they're pretty consistent in what they tell you, is which, the federal politicians don't want it, and they don't have any evidence to support their position. State politicians seem to want it. You know, there's a funny game going on with medical marijuana. You know, the feds make it illegal, and state governments make it legal, and the state law enforcement seeks out the feds to attack it. And it's just a big boss hog circus in the as usual in the political arena. Unfortunately, the average American apparently is too stupid to notice all this in their fog of consciousness that they live in, to use an Orwellian term, to put it in an Orwellian way, that is. So anyways, so why do I analyze this book? Well, because like I tell my students at the university, what you go by is evidence. Your opinion doesn't matter. Your belief doesn't matter. What matters is what the evidence supports. What is evidence? It's what you can see. Okay, it's not what somebody tells you. It's not what you hope is the case, or you believe is the case, or you want to be the case. It's what evidence leads to a specific conclusion. And the best evidence, the best way to gather evidence is with empirical evidence. That seems to be the most successful way. When we sit around and think things up, and try to analyze things with our thoughts, making theories and models, that sometimes works, but usually doesn't. Usually when we use our eyes and senses to perceive the world, that's when we can figure out what's going on. Unfortunately, most people aren't doing that. So this book, Science of Marijuana, is basically an empirical account of studying marijuana. And so here we go. Let's start reviewing it. Let's start off with one biggie. What does the book say about cancer? That's important because if I pick up my recent issue of High Times magazine here, page 20, there's bottom half of the page has an article titled "Canna BS," and what they say here is here are the 5 oft-told mistruths about cannabis, which must be laid to rest immediately. So you already know that there's a problem here with what they're saying. Okay, because they're using mistruths. All right, they're human beings aren't things that know truths. Okay. If we did, we wouldn't have departments in universities called sciences, and we wouldn't have newscasts and stuff. I mean, we'd know a lot of stuff, but we don't know hardly anything at all. So therefore, we'll have to battle each other and try to figure things out and so forth. So, but anyway, so it looks like this argument's trying to argument from an absolute point of view. But here's what they say: one of the mistruths, believe it or not, according to High Times magazine, page 20 in the it's November 2012. Cannabis cures cancer, they say, is a mistruth. Okay, it's been shown that THC kills cancer cells in petri dishes, and many people swear that hemp oil cured their cancer. But keep in mind, cancer is a complex and varied group of diseases. Saying cannabis cures cancer is premature. It's like saying bread mold cures infection, because bread mold led to penicillin, which led to a whole range of antibiotics. Still, legal cannabis will lead to new and better cancer treatments. And that's it. That's all they say. Now, a good rule of thumb is, when there's a humongous issue like that, if somebody sums it up in one small paragraph, usually it's going to be a bunch of crap, because nothing this complex can be summed up that quickly. But rather than having you hear it from me, I'm just going to turn to Iverson's book here and see what it says about cancer. And it has a whole lot to say. Let's just go to page 148 here. and I quote, THC and other cannabinoids have been shown to be surprisingly effective in inhibiting the proliferation of a variety of human cancer cell lines in tissue culture experiments including breast, prostate, colorectal, gastric, lung, uterus, pancreas, and thyroid cancers. Particularly impressive are the inhibitory effects of the growth on glioma tumors in experimental animals. Okay, that's just 2 sentences. And this Iverson here has 2 very impressive footnotes, meaning that they're very good scholarly empirical sources backing this information up. But what's most interesting here is this contradicts everything that you just heard in High Times magazine. Okay, so it's up to you. You can read a magazine which has, you can believe a magazine which has a little blurb with no evidence supporting it in a very authoritative tone, or you can believe something from an empirical scholarly point of view which has lots of good footnotes supporting it. And if you go look up those articles, they're going to have a zillion more footnotes, and they're all going to refer to experiments you can do for yourself so you can see it with your own eyes. Okay. But the interesting thing is that the 2 claims in the High Times quote are exactly the 2 claims in Science of Marijuana that are, well, Science of Marijuana gives the opposite information on. Okay, High Times specifically says, cancer is a multi-varied group of diseases, complex and varied group of diseases. Well, that's exactly what Science of Marijuana just said. It just lists all kinds of different cancers, and it's a treatment against all of them. Okay, and then amazingly, this is what I don't get about stupid media, putting High Times magazine in a media scenario. People in media, wherever it is, are just simply not careful. That's why always through my career, when I used to have a big radio show that I ran and so forth, I always just use academic sources because it's just more careful. All right. I wrote a whole big book on some conspiratorial political issues, had 820 footnotes, and most of those were academic footnotes, just because even though academics have their problems, they're not very, we all are familiar with the problems with academics, but it's just at least more careful than the incredible sloppiness of media. So anyway, the next point that the High Times blurb here on page 20 of this issue says is that it kills cancer in petri dishes. It makes it sound like, and that's the only place it's killed cancer. Okay, well, right here on page 48 of Science of Marijuana, it says, particularly impressive are the inhibitory effects of the growth of glioma tumors in experimental animals. So did High Times just forget that? What's their deal? They're making it look like that's all that cannabis does is kills cancer in a petri dish, which lots of things will kill cannabis in a petri dish. Will kill cancer in a petri dish. All right, so but they, I guess, just forget to say that in animals it treats cancer also. They forget. Everybody, all of you are familiar. You go to Kush Philosophy YouTube channel, and you'll see the news report. Yes, it's a media report, but assuming it's accurate, of the boy who had, which all of you probably know of, had cannabis oil put in his feeding tube, a little 2-year-old, and he went home 3 weeks later cancer-free after being on his deathbed. I guess did High Times forget about that too, or something? So I don't know what the deal is with this. Now, you know what this leads to? I've noticed this shift. About a year or 2 ago, everybody used to talk about how cannabis was, treatment for Alzheimer's, treatment for this, treatment for that, treatment for cancer. Now, I think it's only the case that people are talking about, it's a painkiller. It helps with radiation treatment or something. Basically every single page of the Science of Marijuana book contradicts that. Okay, and I think I noticed that first, this new paradigm now, which I guess everybody's onto. Right here, the same article in High Times, they talk about how what cannabis is best for is painkiller. That's fine. Whatever. Maybe that's what people have to do to get the federal government to try to go along with it, or whatever. If your job is trying to get those clowns to go along with what what's good for the people, which they've never done really once ever. So the mass media started talking about cannabis as being a painkiller. Now everybody else just follows along, which kind of always works that way. What the mass media reports on is what people will go to work the next day and talk about. If there's a new war, that's what it'll be reported in the news, and everybody will go talk about it. And then they'll miss all the big issues going on, like the 20 million orphans in Africa, or the burning of the rainforest, or something like that. So let me just continue on here. Here's the rest of what I guess High Times just wasn't aware that cancer treatment exists in with cannabis. And human patients too. Man, it's right here. Science of Marijuana, page 148. Let me just read here. In a pilot clinical trial, THC was injected directly into tumors of patients with recurrent glioblastoma tumor growth, and was reported to reduce tumor cell proliferation in 2 of 9 subjects. Wow. Okay, so we've got like a 30% success rate. Well, obviously, it needs to be tweaked so we can get it up to 50, 80, 100%. Figure out how to do it, but there's an interesting success rate, which is pretty dramatic and pretty incredible. And the whole world's searching for the cancer cure, and it looks like Science of Marijuana right here on page 48 is talking about how cannabis is an amazing cancer treatment. So while everybody's talking about cannabis being a painkiller, and High Times magazine is telling us it doesn't, basically implying it doesn't cure cancer, well, the academic source right here from Oxford University Press is saying that, well, it's showing how cannabis is such a good treatment. So I don't get it. This is just something I've noticed my whole life. You've got the information from the media on one hand, and the populace goes along with it, and they talk to each other in the terms and subjects and concepts they learn through the mass media, and they turn their back on better sources of information, such as their own critical thinking, if they would ever learn to exercise it, or some academic information. So this is just really too bad. Even the supposed rebel, cannabis magazines now are just going right along with the mass media, more or less. Anyway, let's move on to another topic here, since we only have a half hour. Let's go to page 158 of this very, very informative, wonderful book, Science of Marijuana by Leslie Iverson, Oxford University Press. It says on page 158, at the beginning of the toxicity section, it says, quote, THC is a very safe drug. Laboratory animals can tolerate doses up to 1,000 milligrams per kilogram. This would be equivalent to 70 kilogram person swallowing 70 grams of the drug, 5,000 times more than is required to produce a high. Despite the widespread illicit use of cannabis, there are very few, if any, instances of people dying from an overdose. Well, that's amazing. This book is, I think, implying or in a roundabout saying that nobody dies from THC. I mean, I think a lot of you probably know that, but it's just really interesting to hear it from this source. I think what are the 2 side effects of cannabis? The 2 side effects are paranoia, and I think like a heart arrhythmias or severe palpitations that can be ongoing. To my knowledge, those are the only real side effects that happen. And I think if you eat too much, there can be some pretty extended side effects with the paranoia. But in this book talks about that.